Well, welcome everybody to the pre-conference. This one is done between Dave Ruland and I. Dave could not make it for, health reasons. So, we want to definitely hope that he ends up with a speedy recovery and the best care possible. So he really wanted to be here, but I wanted to at least relay his apologies there. So he's from Reedsburg. He put together the presentation at least on a kind of a flow chart of things, and so I populated it with content to kind of beef it up a little bit. And then at the end of it, we can do some Q&A, and I can probably give you an idea on how we can manipulate sound, get to where you want to get at. If you want something a little bit more intense, we're doing one on multi-tracking this afternoon, and so that's going to be done with a guy, Derek Schwank, who runs Gemini Studios in Janesville, in between Janesville and Milton. And I've recorded his band play a couple times, so that's a little bit more intense. That's getting down into, capturing every single microphone on the stage, turning around and remixing it. So this session here is more of kind of a basic, kind of an overview. So hopefully it'll kind of guide you, give you some ideas on how to what best practices there are. So, and I'll launch into it. First off, know your microphones. I presented this last year, so if you came to the session that Boyce and I ended up covering, we kind of touched base on this. We were running through a lot of content at that time, but basically the microphones you see up here, I got quite a variety. I did bring a couple of them with me. But the top ones over here, we're dealing with our shotgun microphones, which are considered hypercardioid. And the next slide, I'll explain, the polar patterns. But the idea is it's trying to get as narrow of a pattern and pick up that voice from a distance. The one disadvantage that you have is that if I'm over here with a microphone pointing there to get the guy in the back of the room talking, and you're a heavy breather, well, I'm going to get your breathing and his talking at the same time. So that's one of the problems with using shotgun microphones. So you really want to think about your microphone getting as close to your source as possible. One advantage for a shotgun microphone, you've seen people with poles, microphone on top of it. You can really get that kind of close in and a tight pattern. So that's one option. The other stuff that I like to use, and I was playing a video before you came in here, which was a recital in a nice quiet theater at the Women's Club. And in that recital, I had a choir mic planted at the edge of the stage pointing straight up towards the performers, because I knew there was going to be piano along with like flute and violin and such. And so the choir mic was kind of nice because it could pick up the piano as well as the person that was closest to it. So these two up here are kind of the choir mic. I got one here. Not much to it. These things can hang from a ceiling if you want to. And if you look on the ceiling up here, all these 2x2 squares, if you take a little piece of coat hanger and bend it with a couple of angles, you can pop it in there and actually hang one of these, because I can take the microphone out of the stand and literally hang it over your subject matter. So we do that in the studio and record on a separate track when we're doing our interviews, so that way if somebody's lavalier microphone cuts out, you're grabbing it from another source. You got at least a backup here. It works okay for a choir, but then again, you want to get it kind of close to your subject matter. It is what they consider a cardioid pattern, so it kind of picks up in front of itself, like this microphone's a cardioid one. But it's kind of a wide pattern. So if I were going to use this to record a choir, I'd probably end up trying to use 3 of them. If the choir is as wide as these tables here, I'd put one in the center and then one over here, one over there. Try to get a nice even feed. The one on the far right is a parabolic one. That's manufactured by a guy out of Janesville. So we've only used it on a handful of things. It's isolating. It works like your shotgun microphone type pattern. It's a smaller version than what you would see at a football game. So if you ever see these guys running around with these giant dishes, well, yeah, they're trying to pick up what the quarterback's saying. Now in the realm of regular microphones, these are right here are a variety of dynamic and condenser microphones. A condenser microphone is something that needs power to run it. All microphones need some kind of power running through them, basically a preamplifier. But with the condensers, they need voltage. In some condenser microphones, you put a AA battery inside of it. But if you can use phantom power, some of our cameras have phantom power on. You'll want to make sure that you use the phantom power that's accessible there if you can't use a battery. If you're going to be using a cheaper, smaller camera that has like a mini jack to plug in your microphone, and you want to use a nice condenser mic, you would have to run that through what's called a preamp. And a preamp would be able to give you, most preamps have some kind of a phantom power in them to be able to give that microphone the power to run. Because the microphones that are condenser are working more from thin plates and electromagnetic charge, and not from just what a regular dynamic microphone is, which is like a plastic bubble over a coil, and that bubble pressure kind of makes it shake within that coil. Next one over is just a wireless microphone, so that's a Shure system there, and a Sennheiser, so you got two different kinds there. And on the far right, we're actually using those in the hall over there, and those are Rode microphones, and they work great line of sight. And they got batteries. The one on the right, which is the little white ones, those were the first generation they had. I wouldn't waste your money on that. I'd get the second ones, the Wireless 2 Go, which is the one that's on the black here. So it's actually, if you look at it, there's actually two transmitters and one receiver that's in stereo. So that's like the microphone to use when you're in the field and you want to be able to do an interview between two people. They work really well. And at the same time, you can also tell those things. If you hook them up to your computer, you can actually program them to record directly to them. So there's that advantage too. But keep in mind that once you do set that thing up, it'll record until it's full. So 24 hours later, all of a sudden your microphone's not working well. That's because you set it to record and it's full. Yes?
About the wireless Rode 2.
Yeah.
Do you know could I hook up a condenser or a dynamic mic to the transmitter?
Dynamic, you could. You could use it with an adapter. I would suggest getting the wireless mics that come with it, or sorry, the little lavalier microphones that come with it. I think I might actually have some here.
Well, we actually have those, and I'm wondering if I can hook up like an XLR to a mini.
I'd think you'd be able to, because I'm sure these things, these are just, here's a couple of the simple ones that plug into these units. Yeah, you should be able to. It's going to have to be a dynamic, but I don't think this thing has any kind of phantom power to it. I can't swear by it. I'd have to test it out to see if it's capable. So I would probably go with a dynamic microphone if you're going to be using the Rode system and want to be able to have something that's handheld. But keep in mind too, if you look at the left on the picture here, that device right there, that's a holder that'll hold it like a microphone and a handle. So you might want to just go with that instead of trying to plug another microphone in, unless you have a microphone that you just love and you have to use. But for most purposes, I mean, right now in the other room, as they're using these microphones, one person's got it as a puck. I refer to them as pucks. And the other person's got one with the handle. So we only had one handle. So because if I'm a camera operator and I'm interviewing somebody, I usually have the one clipped onto my shirt here, and then I'm giving the other one to somebody else, and then I can ask questions and you can hear everybody talking. The nice thing about these things too is I kind of use them as a kind of a redundant backup. So if you use one mic for your live person speaking, you can put another one like on a table, and then if you have that one random person that I'm doing a presentation, all of a sudden somebody comes over here and talks, well, if I got that puck on there and here, it can pick up a lot of space. And I've used that at we had an event with the police department, and so they were talking from a podium, so I ran one of these little skinny mics and taped it to the microphone in the room, kind of up there, and then I had another one down on the table over there near the awards, and somebody received an award and they made some sly comment to the police officer up at the podium. I captured them because I had that secondary mic down there. And that way I didn't have to fix it too much in post. Okay, excuse me. So here's your polar patterns, the way the microphones end up picking up. Of course, you have, does everybody understand omnidirectional, unidirectional? So I don't really need to get into the weeds of it. omnidirectional, really the only time you'd want to use something like that is if you're kind of stuck and you got a bunch of people kind of in a circle and you need to record them. It'll work. It's more of a microphone you'd want to use if you want to get nature sounds, background. Let's say I'm going to go out and I'm making a documentary and or a horror film, and I got people running through the forest. Well, you know, you want to be able to hear the forest. Well, I'd probably take an omnidirectional microphone into the forest and capture my forest sounds that way. But other than that, omnidirectional it's great for recording, but you know, in a small environment that's kind of dead, like in here, because we got carpeting, we got tile, we got treatments in the windows, so it's kind of dead. An Omni might work good for just recording purposes, but as soon as we start putting it through these speakers, we could run into some problems of feedback. So that's the only problem, is because this microphone's behind the speakers, it's pointing towards me, it's isolated, you know, but it's behind that speaker. So if I was using an omnidirectional here, I might have to be a little cautious with how loud I get this microphone. So that's kind of what's up with the polar patterns. One thing to keep in mind is proximity effect too. So I'm gonna make a little noise here. So, you know, here I am talking into the microphone. Oh, it's making noise because of the fan on my computer. But it might be a little loud. But yeah, I mean, if you get real close, then I'm kind of beefy, and that's the guy on the upper left. And then I move back to about here, and probably with the person recording back there is going, that's that sweet spot. It sounds great. But if I start moving back to here, now all of a sudden, you're going to lose a lot of that low end. So we're looking at frequency here. So from left to right, we're talking 20 hertz to about 500 hertz, because that's kind of what the space where a lot of voices are in, frequency-wise, because things go up to 20 kilohertz if you have baby's ears. Everybody listens to too much loud music, so our ears are probably losing a bunch of those upper frequencies. But yeah, as you move further back away from the microphone, you start losing that low end. And that's why, you know, when you're recording choirs, a lot of choirs are, you know, singers are aware they need to, you know, boost their sound. But usually when you're recording like a choir performance, you tend to you think, oh, well, golly, why are the guys singing so quietly? Well, they might not be singing so quietly. They might be so far away from their mic source that you're ending up with a proximity effect and you're losing those low frequencies. So sometimes it's a good idea, if you're going to be recording something like a choir, you might want to have some microphones closer to those basses because of things like proximity effect. Okay, now does anybody and everybody understand? Raise your hand if you understand what mic level and line level is. Okay, so some of you need to know some more things here. Okay, when I look at a microphone, this isn't plugged into anything. If I talk into it, it's not going to amplify anything. It needs to have some kind of power or preamp to be able to run it, okay? And the mixer serves as a preamp. Or plugging it into your camera and turning the volume up on your camera becomes the preamp, okay? So it needs power to it. Second item over is an instrument. Okay, the instruments, it comes in a little bit warmer, like a guitar would come in just a little bit warmer, but it's running on the same principle. It's working with a magnet and a copper coil wrapped around it, because that's what's inside a lot of the microphones that we use. So it's already got that. The only thing is the magnet's a little bit larger, so it's got a little bit more oomph. So when it's plugged into a sound source, it's going to be louder than a microphone. And plus it's also more direct, because this thing has the distance of me to the microphone that it has to take into account before it amplifies it, whereas an instrument is plugging directly in and it's the strings vibrating within that magnetic field close to the pickups. The next item over is a line level device. The one pictured here might be a preamp. It could be a powered, a mixer. And basically the idea is that this is going to be like 20 to 30 decibels louder than what a microphone would be feeding. So on most mixing boards, if you look on a mixing board, there's a gain at the top, a gain knob, usually where you plug in your microphone. That's if you're using a mixing board. That gain knob might have it might be labeled mic on the far right and then line on the far left. And the idea there is that, okay, you're being able to adjust how much, taking into account how loud the device is to begin with before it gets running through your system. So think about it like this. My phone here is a line level instrument. Why is it a line level instrument? Well, I can put it on speakerphone and I can hear somebody. So it's already amplified one way. So it has a preamplifier in it. So if I plug my headphones in it, that's a preamplifier. So my phone falls into the realm of line level because it already has something to push that sound out. Now when you go into the land of speakers, speakers have even more push because basically they're taking this copper wire wrapped around a magnet, going through a mixer, and then turning around and pushing it out of a cone that is a piece of paper attached to a magnet and copper wire wrapped around it as well. So it's basically taking this little plastic thing, vibrating up and down, pushing it into a massive thing going out. So you're dealing with a lot more power going there. So with the setup that we have here right now, is I have a mixing board, I got my computer plugged into it, and this microphone plugged into it. This microphone's gain is turned up. This computer's gain is turned down because it's line level. And then it's hitting this speaker, and so we have to take into account the level on the speaker here. This speaker, I could plug a microphone directly into it, and I can set it to microphone level, and so it'll be like 20, 30 decibels hotter than what a mixing board would go through it. So that way I could use my microphone directly into it. But as soon as I end up applying something like a mixer or like my phone plugged into that thing, I gotta switch it to line level or else it's gonna be screaming and distorting as it comes out. So you have to keep that in mind. I mean, for example, the person in the back who's filming the show right now, she is taking an XLR feed off of that speaker. So the speaker allows you to kind of route out of the speaker. So I'm running through a mixer, into the speaker, and into that speaker too. But this speaker also has a direct out off of it that's going back to her. Now, that is most likely a line level feed because there's already a preamplifier in here amplifying it. But I have a volume knob attached to things so that we can kind of control it. But I'm pretty sure you're getting line level, right? Yep, she gave me a thumbs up. So line level is what she's getting back there. So, if you're going to be recording something and you got access to something like this, your small little Sony Handycams might not be able to handle a line level coming into them. They're more for like a microphone level. So in a case of running something like that, you would probably want to record into a different device, something like a field recorder. So here's an example of a couple screens. The one on the left is for a Sony Handycam. The one on the right is for an expensive Panasonic Pro camera. Okay, so with the Handycam, if I'm going to plug in a microphone, like a wireless microphone into it, I'm never going to leave it on auto. And I've had an employee come back with a recording of a police chief, and it was outside at Rotary Botanical Gardens, and he's talking, he's kind of a mellow guy, even though his clip-on lavalier microphone's like right up here. She had the camera set at auto. And by having the camera set at auto, every time he'd take a pause, that camera's going, automatic gain, I'm not hearing anything. And all of a sudden you hear the birds coming through and the air blowing through the trees. And then as soon as he talks, he comes back in, and then it comes back up again. Trying to fix that in your editing software is almost impossible. You can map it out all day, but you would lose your mind. So keep in mind that when you are using microphones, the best thing to do is probably set it at a manual setting, get it adjusted well. The only time you'd ever use auto is if you're on a family vacation. So think about your audio as mic level. Now if you look at the one on the right, that particular camera has an XLR input in it. So it's got one of these lovely jacks here. And the idea, the principle behind XLR is that you can run the cables a real long distance, and basically it's sending a signal kind of in two paths, but they're inverted waves, and for some reason, if there's any kind of hum or noise or electrical cable running across your microphone cable and could potentially pick up a buzz, it gets canceled out because of this extra line that's running through here. So this camera on the right ends up taking a microphone going in that way. But if you look, I got different switches on there. I got a line switch, I got a mic switch, I got a plus 48V switch, just on input number 1, and then it says channel select. I can choose microphone, the internal microphone on the camera itself, so that's INTL, or I can do input 1, or I can do input 2, the XLR inputs on that. And then I still have audio level control as well. So if I'm taking a feed off of a mixing board, I'd have this thing set at line, and then I could adjust my volume to kind of fine tune what I'm picking up from there. If I'm using a microphone like, I believe this one's a condenser. Yeah, this one's a condenser microphone. If I'm using this with the camera on the right, I have to switch it to plus 48V. So that's basically sending a charge through these electric plates, or this might be an electret microphone, which is a statically charged little plastic bubble head going into like a couple possibly metal wafers that are picking up the sound, but they need to have a voltage coming through to them. Now, if this microphone's screwed apart and I could put a AA battery into it, I wouldn't have to worry about that mic setting. But since it doesn't, I need phantom power. So I would be switching input number 1 down to plus 48V if I'm using this particular microphone. Okay, field recorders. Field recorders are the best thing in the world. I'm showing you one here. This is a Zoom H6. Every single input on that thing, with the exception of the XY or the LR microphone capsule on the front of the unit, can be switched to either mic level or line level. So in the case of this setup, where I'm taking a feed off of a mixing board, and I got 2 microphones in the field kind of picking up the ambient sound, what do you think input number 1 and 2 are set to? If I got mic or line level? Line. So I'd have it switch that because there's that mixing board already has a preamplifier in it amplifying your signal coming to that recorder. And then on the microphone, obviously I'd have it at mic, set for mic, because those microphones don't have anything preamplifying them in between this microphone and that recorder. But the cool thing about this particular recorder is it's got 6 tracks to it. So you can capture 6 independent waveforms. You can have them together as a stereo pair if you wanted to when you record them. The capsule on it also has an 1/8" jack on it. So if you just wanted to plug in your phone and pirate some music, I'm not encouraging that. And you could use an 1/8" jack and then run it into the 1/8" jack on that LR capsule on the top there and actually record from your phone straight into this recorder too. Another option might be, well, you like the way your microphone's on your camera, or let's say you have a pro camera and you got all these great microphones on it. You could potentially do a line out from your camera into that and record your audio as well there as on your camera too. So there's different ways of playing with it. And I didn't add very many different varieties, but last year, if you do get a chance to see some of our videos from last year's presentation, I kind of get thick into the weeds of different ways I've captured sound using this kind of thing, because there have been times where the guy has the band has the cheapest mixing board ever, and they're using every single in and out on that thing, and my only option might be the headphone jack. So what I can do is I'd plugged into that 1/4" headphone jack, and then I made an XLR adapter that looks kind of like this. And so I'd plug in the headphone jack, and then I'd go at XLR and I'd run it all the way over to my recording equipment, and then I'd have the female version of this plug splitting into 2 of these things that are left and right, separating the signal, so that way I could actually record off the headphone jack into my recording equipment. It's a little sloppy, and you might have to really kind of pay attention to your sound. You might have to set your inputs as line level, and you might have to go up and turn up and down that headphone volume knob on the mixer to get the sweet spot. But at least it's better than just planting a microphone in front of a speaker. And when it comes to capturing sound, I mean, it's always good to talk to the sound engineers that are going to be running the show and say, hey, can you give me a feed off of your equipment so that we can record it. Keeping in mind you gotta usually have it as a line level. Sometimes it ends up being really, really, really hot, where it's like all of a sudden it's so amplified, it's coming in screaming hot, beyond me switching it to line level and having no room on the volume knob. Well, if you run into that, you can get something like this. This is an attenuator. So it's got that's a female plug, XLR on one side, male plug on the other side. And it's got a switch on here where it says 20 dB, 30 dB, 40 dB. So you can switch between, you can really pad it down a lot. Another place that you could use this is if you wanted to take your Sony Handycam, which has only an 1/8 inch jack in it, and you got like an XLR to 1/8 inch jack plug that works, and I'd be, you got to be kind of cautious you're not getting something that goes stereo in, because you'd want to keep it kind of mono, and this is not really considered a stereo device. But you could take a feed off of somebody's mixing board, run it through this, and switch it 20 dB, 30 dB down, and it'll take that line level input down to a mic level, and it might have less distortion with it. But we do use this with some equipment that doesn't have the ability to switch between mic and line. We'll use this device, and it really helps in a pinch, especially if you have something that only takes in a mic level signal and you got a line source coming in. Okay. Now the other options you have here, and the second image is going to give you a better example. And this is where my partner Dave wanted to kind of cover. He likes to use his iPhone to record a lot of concerts and events. And so what he likes to use is this audio interface, which basically is a preamplifier that'll turn your signal into digital signal, and you can plug it in USB or any kind of adapter into your recording source. You can record into your computer, you can record into your camera phone. So he likes to record into his camera phone with it. This thing is powered by whatever cable you're using to plug into that source to record. So if I plug it in my computer, I would want to have the power on my computer plugged in, so I'm not like draining the battery on this to run that device. So in the world of I want to record on my iPad, I want to record on my iPhone, you would need to have some kind of a splitting device that would be able to allow you to plug in a power supply and the device at the same time. So here's the setup that he's using for doing, this is kind of his like cheap little easy interview type of setup. And so, or doing podcasting. So he has two microphones plugged into this Focusrite thing. And looking at the microphones up there, one of them is a dynamic microphone, the other one's a condenser. So the SM57 that he's got pictured on the upper right, a skinny microphone that looks kind of like this one, that one's a dynamic microphone, so it doesn't need phantom power, so it doesn't need that plus 24. The other mic, though, on the other side looks like an Audio-Technica AT2020. That would need some kind of power to it. But the Focusrite device, you can switch it to be able to say, hey, it's phantom power, turn that on. Well, as soon as you're doing that, you're creating voltage for the microphone. That's draining whatever your power supply is to it, which is most likely this phone. So not only is the phone powering up the red box, it's also powering up a microphone, and it's just gonna lose power like faster than you know. So he's got a splitting device, and it's that white box that's in front of the red box on the right upper right-hand picture is the easiest one to see. And that's splitting one signal where it's feeding into the camera, and then the other signal, or the other path, is for the power to the phone, and that's powering the phone and the Focusrite. So he uses that, and he can record straight to his phone. I'm not sure what software he's using. You might have to look at different apps that are available, because I'm not going to say one's the best, but that's kind of an idea of how it works. Okay, and then there's mixers. Okay, the one on the right's an analog one, the one on the left's a digital one. This one I have in the other room. We're using it in the big hall, so if you ever want to just check it out, you can come get me. I'll show you how it works. Right now, the way it's just basically a black box, and it's got a USB out, so I can plug it into my computer, and I can record every single one of those microphone inputs isolated as their own individual wave into my computer. So that way I could remix a band. So if I were to use that for guitar, bass, drums, vocals, 8 tracks, 9 tracks, I could record that into my computer from just that digital device. So that's the beauty of digital. But I mean, if you're going to a concert and you're going to record some band and they have something like this, you'll want to talk to the sound engineer in advance so you know what you're kind of getting into, because if you have to plug your computer into their stuff, you have to keep in mind that you might need to download some kind of plug in to kind of bridge the gap between your computer and that digital device. And there's there's different ones out there. So you got to keep that in mind, because I mean, if I'm recording with my MacBook in the field off of a digital mixer, and let's say it's an Allen and Heath or whatever, I have to make sure that I have the Allen and Heath downloaded plug-in or whatever you want to call it to be able to bridge the gap between my computer and that digital source. And then I got to make sure I have enough hard drive space. I would suggest that if you do get into the world of multi-tracking, we'll be discussing it this afternoon, you're better off using with something that's going to be like an Apple OS than using something that's Microsoft. And the whole reason why is it just Macs for some reason can handle these super large files without chopping them up into chunks, whereas in the world of the PC it kind of likes 2 gigabytes and calls it a day. So if you'll run into problems and you'll run into lost audio files if you're using a Microsoft computer recording a multiple tracks coming in. So you want to make sure that, and the other thing too is if you do use a Mac and you record something that's like 18 to 32 tracks of audio coming in, when your show's done, you save your file in that program that you're using to record, and I can get into that for the afternoon. I've turned off my computer too soon, even though it says it saved it, because everything's still churning in there. Because I mean, if you're throwing, let's say, I don't know if you've played around with audio files, a whole album might be 45 minutes on a CD, and a CD holds 750 megabytes of information. Well, if you're going with 18 tracks and it's an hour long, each of those tracks could be a half a gig a piece. So if it's recording, it's kind of holding it in its RAM until it's done processing it. So yeah, the last thing I turn off equipment-wise, I'll go around, turn off my cameras, unplug everything. I won't power down that Mac until I'm absolutely feel like I'm done, because I've lost tracks. But I always do a redundant backup. Even when I'm recording in digital, I always use a field recorder. And I always make sure that especially when you're recording something like a live event, on my little cheap Sony cameras, I still set them at manual and try to get them adjusted just right for the band. And that way I always have a redundant backup somewhere in case something epically fails. I do like to keep one camera, because most of my shoots when we're doing multi-camera events, like a concert, I try to keep one camera on automatic gain, and the only reason I do that is for the applause in between tunes, because it's kind of nice to be able to get that applause in there, because most of the time if the sound man's really good, the applause is going to be a lot quieter than what the band is as it's projecting into a field. Okay, here's your what I was just basically alluding to. So on the left is my MacBook plugged into that mixing board right there. And it could be a Midas board, it could be an Allen Heath, it could be a Mackie, who knows, PreSonus, doesn't matter. But I have the ability to record, and if you look right here, these are all the little indicators of where my volume is at. So this is where the gain's coming, because the way I'm recording it with this setup here is I'm taking it from really where the raw signal comes into the mixing board. And I'll get into the weeds this afternoon on that one. But at the same time, on the far right, you see the guy with kind of the thick coat. In front of him is my H6 field recorder, and that one is taking a main out off this mixing board as well. And it's also using the XY capsules, picking up the live sound in front. And if we really felt like it, there's this. If this was like the Jimmys, if everybody's seen the Jimmys play, the keyboard player plays a Leslie box, which is this big brown box. It's like 2 of these things or 3 of these things together, and it's just rotating speakers. Excuse me. And so it goes boom, 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 when he plays the keyboard, it's just like blah. So anybody who's like really into Deep Purple knows what I'm talking about. And so with that, the sound man's got microphones on the stage, but it might not pick up the liveliness enough of that rotating speaker. So I might put a couple other choir mics up there kind of in the vicinity, so I can kind of get that that deep purple feel of what's going on. But yeah, redundancy is here. So if this thing crashes, I still got my field recorder to do it. But that's kind of going over the top on that. The one thing, where I was talking about automatic and manual, you really need to kind of look at your signals and seeing where they're at coming in. I know with my Sony cameras, they got like little white lines that kind of show you where you're at with your sound. And if I got it set on manual, if it's going all the way and filling up the whole screen, you got it too hot. And then I can adjust it and bring it down. Some of the cameras that we have will also show you going from white to red, and that would be the indicator. Do you know how long this session is supposed to go? I don't want to overdo it, and I want to leave room for questions. 9:50, okay, so we're at 9:35, so we're doing good. So yeah, so the one on the bottom is clipped audio, the one on the top says original audio, but let's just say we had 2 microphones in the same area. I turned one up a little bit hot because somebody's a quiet speaker, but I turned the other one down a bit because the other person's a loudspeaker. So, as soon as the quiet person comes in, I might grab that amplified audio on the clipped audio, but as soon as our loud person comes in, I'm probably grabbing the original. But yeah, if your sound is going all the way to where it's flatlined on the top, it's kind of creating what they call like a saw edge. Anybody play guitar here? No guitar players? Okay, we got one. You use a distortion?
Yes.
Yeah. You know what that does? It just takes that sound wave and it just chops right off the top of it. And it gives it this meaty, like, sound. You don't want that to be your voice talking in a microphone. So you're better off having it a little bit on the quiet side and boosting the signal up later than ending up with a clipped one, because trying to fix a clipped sound, it's a lost cause. You're going in there and you're trying to pull out frequencies that just sound ugly, and it never works. Trust me. Okay, here's the talking about signal chain. This is the speaker right here, but I also have a mixing board down here, like the one I showed on the picture. It's nothing spectacular. I don't have a way of showing you what it looks like, but you can always come up here and look at it later. But my microphone's running into that, but you need to kind of make sure you know where your signal's at. So for example, on this one, this mixer is getting plugged into the input number 1. So this is one input there. And then down here, I got a mic line button next to the volume knob for input 1. And so I push that one in so it's line level coming in because my mixing board already is amplified. Now if I were going to use this microphone and plug it directly into there, I would have it on mic level instead. And there's going to be that 30 decibel difference because that's 30 decibels hotter than what this is on its own. And so then the output, I can either parallel it into that, and it ends up becoming what they call a loop, or where kind of it just basically echoes what's in coming from there over to there, and it takes it down to a line level. But in this case, what we're doing is we're sending it back to our camera operator in the back of the room. So that's how we're using it. So the chain here is microphone comes in, goes through the mixer, goes into the amplifier, goes out of the amplifier into the camera operator in the back. There's a lot of things in there, and anywhere in this path, noise could be introduced. So you have to be really kind of cautious when you hook up this stuff. If you're hearing a buzz coming through your equipment, something is wrong, something's not connected very well. I found that even recording like out in an outside concert, let's say, and the sound man's got his equipment conditioned. It's running through a voltage regulator because he knows, well, I'm recording in a park, and how trustworthy is the power here? We might have some shorts here and there. So he's using a conditioner. He hands me an XLR cable to feed into my gear, and I'm getting this coming through with it. I'm like, what the heck? And how do I eliminate that? I can't. So one thing I've done is I've taken a wireless setup, and I think I'll go back to show you the wireless microphones here. So the wireless that's in the middle on the bottom, that, if you look to the right, there's the one that's it's an XLR transmitter, okay? I would use that. So I'd go from the mixing board, plug it into that, and then I'd have that's a transmitter, and then I'd have a receiver plugged into my camera. And what I just did is I took out the hum completely because his power source is fine. I'm working with AA batteries on my little transmitter, and so there's no interference there. And then it's wirelessly coming back to my gear, takes out the hum, because I'm working on a different voltage than he's working on, and different voltages can create havoc. So that's kind of one way to circumvent the issue of a hum is wirelessly transmitting your sound from that sound man's gear to your gear. Keeping in mind that input device also has a gain control in it, which can take it from a mic level down to a line level. So if I'm taking a feed off of this board, I might have to set it, if I'm using a microphone, it might be set at +6. But if I'm taking a feed off of this mixing board, I might have it dialed down to -24 dB in order to handle that line level signal. So back to where we were. Oh, and then yeah, see our little manual thing? Right here you can see this is where the audio level's at. So I still got some room on that sound, you know, if I needed to turn it up or down. All right, where are we at? Here we are, we're almost there. Hey! Okay, now we're gonna talk about bit depth, and I need to drink some coffee. I haven't blown your mind yet, have you? Everybody's following pretty good? Yeah? All right. And if you're not, just find me later and I'll explain it all to you again. Okay, so in bit depth world, most of the stuff we're recording in is actually 48 kilohertz. That's what we want to go for in the land of video. You don't want to be recording MP3s. MP3s are for the music that you listen to on your phone. They're not for your recordings, because ultimately when we're putting our MP4s out there or creating an MPEG-2 for a DVD, what we're doing is we're changing that audio to a 48 kilohertz 16-bit depth. All right? Audio CDs originally were 44.1 kilohertz 16-bit depth. So that's kind of where you're at. The advantage of going with a higher bit depth or higher frequency for your recordings allows you to grab more of the language of the sound. So in the world of 16-bit depth, which is that chunk of a wave on the left-hand side, that gives you an idea where your range is. That's 96 decibels, okay? A lot of people will say, you know, a jet airplane flying over your head or a Ramones concert might be 138 decibels, and that's going from a zero, no sound, to screaming loud, your eardrums are bleeding, okay? So that's a huge range. And you're thinking, well, you know, I'm never going to use up that whole range. Well, if you got a quiet speaker in the back of the room and your microphone's trying to pick them up and you got somebody who's hot in the microphone, you don't want to distort it. You want to be able to have that range so you got room to play when you're mixing later. So now we introduce, and I'm not going to go with 20-bit, I'm going to jump to 24-bit, because most audio gear is like 16-bit, 24-bit, and then it goes up to 32 now. And these are like ones that are available. This is showing you every range possible, but in truth, the stuff that we're working with is more of a 16-bit, 24-bit, and now there's the introduction of 32-bit. And the idea behind the 32-bit, and I have pictures of some devices that are available that you can purchase, is that supposedly you don't even have to set your volume levels. And supposedly you say you're recording in 32-bit, and it's so wide from no sound to too much sound that it'll pick up everything. Because really, when you're talking 192 decibels, if you were to hear something at 192 decibels, your face would melt. You know, it's insane. So you can hear conversation between a cricket and his buddy, the centipede, or, you know, a Ramones concert, all without adjusting your volume, is kind of the idea behind the 32-bit. So there are new recorders out there for that. There's only one catch. Most software can't handle it. You know, most of our software is built for 24-bit. It's not built for 32. So you might have to find a special, digital audio software that can handle it. There is some that's out there that can handle it, but it's, you know, you're not only dealing with software that can't handle it, but you're also dealing with, it's a large file too. So when you start manipulating a lot of these all at once, it can be quite taxing on your computer. So for example, I've recorded so many bands. Most of the stuff I do is like 48 kilohertz, 24-bit, stuff. Back in the day when I first started editing in Vegas, I'd crash. I'd crash the computer. Is everything working fine in the other room?
It's great.
That's great. Yeah, because I set up the sound for the other room, and so now we're kind of dealing with hopefully everything works right in the other room because I'm not around to fix it.
See some horrible audio back. Oh,
Yeah.
is that-
Well, Derek knows what he's talking about, so just ask him. Yeah, so I'd love to show you that mixer if you guys want to see the digital mixer. But yeah, so 32-bit stuff. I mean, it's very affordable. I mean, you got a lavalier microphone here for $180. And then if you want something that's a couple XLRs in there, that one's the F3, and that's $350. So it's not horrible, but for $350, I could also buy the H6, which is the 2 capsules and then 4 plugs on the side, and that can record a lot of stuff. The main advantage of the 32-bit is you don't have to worry about your levels and worrying about distorted sound or too quiet sound because you have room to manipulate that sound. But then again, you have to make sure you got the software that can handle it. And I'm sure Zoom would probably has the software. Hopefully they have it to download. I don't know if Zoom actually having any software because they kind of anticipate that you are using whatever you're using your platform when you're using their device. So, I mean, I think this is kind of an underrated picture because I kind of feel like it's more like, okay, here's the line of no sound, all right? And then here's a 16-bit. Then you got 32-bit, or sorry, here's a 16-bit, then you got 24-bit, and then all of a sudden you got 32-bit. So thinking of it that way is kind of clears the mud a little bit. So you got a lot of room when you're dealing with that kind of a recording format. Okay, now this is an example. I recorded this. I'm doing a session tomorrow on different different mixers, and I'm going to be hitting on the topic of the vMix software. So this is a system that we use with robotic cameras at our library, and I'm in a room with a bunch of RAIDs, and it's air conditioned, and you have all these computer fans just running nonstop. And so I had a microphone really close to me while I'm doing a tutorial. So I'm going to switch between the microphone in front of me in this room with all these fans blowing to the microphone on the camera. And so watching this will give you an idea of the importance of having the microphone close to your source. Hey, this is Alan, and I'm in the studio where we keep a lot of our servers, so you might hear some background noise. I'm using a microphone close up. If I were to use the microphone that was on the camera that's recording right now, you'd hear exactly how noisy that space is. All right, it's noisy. Okay. So yeah, there you go. So that's an example of, okay, good and ugly at the same time. Now I can't move on to the next one. How do you do this thing? There we go. So yeah, so in that particular instance, it was, okay, here's what the room really sounds like. This is what it sounds like when you get your microphone close to your source. So always try to get that microphone as close as you can possible, and then making sure that you're not peaking those audio files. Okay, now to get it right in input, and this is a piece that Dave had thrown in here. It's like pre-production and how to visit. Well, I've been here before, so I know kind of what to expect sound-wise because we're not using the house sound system. We brought our own. I brought the sound system here and the sound system in the other room. But I was also anticipating our camera operator needing to have a feed. So I was preparing for them. Now, at the same time, if you're going and recording something and somebody knows you're going to come and record, but they're not like camera operator friendly, that's where you want to kind of do your research, find out, okay, Soundman's using this mixing board. Can he give me a feed or her give me a feed? Or I'm going to come in and it's going to be in a conference where they're using the house system. Can I tap into the house system? So you might want to talk to somebody who kind of is in charge of grounds and can go, oh yeah, well there's a plug in the wall here. So you might want to bring in your field recorder, test it a day or two before, and make sure you're getting a signal, because you don't want to come in and plug in and you get nothing. Because then you're going to have to start rethinking how you do things. You might want to end up using, your wireless lavalier microphone and taping it up here on the microphone that the person's speaking through, so you have your redundant second microphone in play. Other things is the HVAC, well, you just heard it. You know, our server room, air conditioning's running, all the server fans are going, ugly. Then mic into field recorder at exact spot where you're recording. That's where you want to have your microphone closest to your source is always going to give you the best results. And I mean, you can still have your microphone out there with a shotgun microphone pointing towards speakers in a live event. But if you really want to hear the band sound really, really good, you're better off taking it off the source or having your microphone as close to that source as possible. And I found before I started getting wave files from sound engineers, I mean, there's been some sound guys that just bring in an old analog system and they give me a main feed into my field recorder, and what you hear, what the audience hears in the field is never quite what you hear if you were to put headphones on listening to that mixing board. It's never the same. And we might cover that this afternoon, because I tell you what, this one band I recorded, it's like they sounded great out there, but that main feed that was coming to me, which was going out their mains, was totally different. I mean, all of a sudden the singer's too loud, the bass is like drowned out, you know, the horns pop through, and it's like, okay, all the quiet instruments were amplified. So if I'm doing an analog recording like that, I'm taking a feed off the board. I'm always putting a couple extra choir mics somewhere close to the band up there, because sometimes that'll end up picking up the guitar amplifier, the bass amplifier, the drummer, you know, just trying to get some extra microphones put in place there. When you do remix that kind of stuff, you have to keep in mind sync, because sound only travels how many feet per second? Did anybody know? 300 and something like that. And if you're 100 feet away, guess what? You're off by, you know, in the world of 30 frames per second, let's say, you're off by 10 frames possibly. So you got to really look at your audio waves when you're remixing things and making sure you line them up as close as possible. Because even if they're slightly off and you have something like a violin coming into play, some of those upper frequencies can get canceled out because they're kind of like layering on top of each other and creating a kind of like those noise canceling headphones. You know, the idea is they're picking up the sound, but then they're inverting it so that it disappears. Always wear headphones. That's the only way you're really going to know what's going on. Try to get something that's isolated. Here's a pair that I use every once in a while, AKGs. These work really good. But you want to get something that's got a closed back to it. Because you're not wearing these and you're walking down the street and you're worried about getting hit by a car. No, you're wearing these because you want to be able to hear exactly what you're getting on your recorder. So try to get something that's got a nice ear cup, covers your ears really tight. I mean, because even the things that you shove into your ears, like your little iPhone headphones, they're not going to isolate your eardrum completely. Nothing, you know, you need something like this to really do it. And the other thing is that these come in different ohms, so you want to have them in such a way that you can hear them really well, because you don't want to get something where you got to turn the volume up so loud, but you're not loud enough to get louder than the band playing. You'd rather have these kind of isolate yourself from the band playing so you can hear your isolated sound. So always wear headphones. I'm only going to briefly talk about this, and the only reason David wanted us to bring it up is that he does a lot of stuff in theaters where the sound's routed through what they call Dante. And there's a link to Dante's virtual sound card, which, you know, it's a paid thing. And so you could download that software onto your computer, excuse me, and network hook your computer up to the sound system within whatever building you're recording. And then you can actually patch it through to your computer, and then just use a software on your computer to record all those tracks. So it's in the world of where I was showing you the mixer and there's my MacBook, here's the big mixer, there's a field recorder, and that setup I was just USB right off of the mixing board. And so that way I could use a software, and I use like Tracks Live by Wave.com, and that would isolate every single track that I'm recording. This thing you could map it to and then use the software, but you still need to use some kind of a software to record it. And DAW is a digital audio workstation, I think is what it stands for. And so, yeah, you need to kind of, you're the only problem with using something like this in Dante is that if you come in here and you start changing settings, you might accidentally reroute the sound system for that place that you're at, and then they'll be really pissed. I'm just saying. I've done it once, and it was in Whitewater. They put in a brand new Behringer X32 mixing board, and so the guy who was in charge of the theaters, like at that time I was working for Whitewater, and I was coming to all the concerts, and I coached them on how to set up sound for whatever, so if they have a jazz ensemble, Southern Lakes Conference, and so I'd adjust the sound or whatever. And so they came in with this digital board. Well, then they had Dante, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you can use Dante and then route it to your PC and record off it." I'm like, "That's great." So I got in there with the Dante and I started pushing some buttons and routing some things. Next thing you know, sound system's not working. Now we got to call Metro Sound in Milwaukee to drive all the way to Whitewater, Wisconsin, an hour and 15 minutes away, to upload the software and fix that problem. So, I would warn you against this, if at all possible, messing with this stuff, unless you're the one in charge of the system and you know how it works. So,
Why you back up your settings?
absolutely. So let's see here. It's almost 10. How long does this go till?
About 5 minutes ago.
5 minutes ago? Do you have any questions out of the stuff that we've covered here? I mean, if you got anything in particular you want to ask me about, feel free to run into me and just buzz my brain. I can even show you the mixing board up here to kind of show you how I can use this. There's so many different layers of being able to do this kind of stuff, but I want to make sure that you guys, have the capable and wherewithal how to capture sound. So hopefully I gave you something you can take home. Maybe not. Now you're scared of it and you're like, okay, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to go back to flipping burgers. No. All right, that's it. I'm Alan. Thank you for showing up to our lovely conference, pre-conference.